Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I have a super easy to remember phone number. It's not exactly 123-4 567, but it's that level of simple, the kind where people think I'm making it up when I tell them. At first, having such a memorable number seemed cool. That changed when it became a problem. It started about 5 years ago. I was working as a software developer for a small tech company, mostly keeping to myself. Then the calls began. Random people asking for someone named Dan. At first, I figured it was just wrong numbers. Happens to everyone, right? I would tell them they had the wrong number and that there was no Dan at this number. The callers would often respond with confusion, saying it was weird because Dan had just given them this number the day before. These conversations became a weekly occurrence, then daily. After about the 10th call, I realized this wasn't random. Someone was giving out my number on purpose. Through these calls, I started collecting information. Some callers would mention they were supposed to talk to Dan about the Johnson contract. Others would say that Dan from marketing had told them to call this number about some ad campaign. Eventually, I had his full name, his position, marketing director, and the company he worked for, some mid-sized advertising firm downtown. I even knew what he looked like because one caller described him as the tall guy with the red beard and glasses. For years, I just dealt with it. I'd explain they had the wrong number and move on with my day. Some callers would apologize for bothering me and say they'd try to track down his real number. But others got annoyed, like I was the one causing problems. They would insist this was the number Dan had given them and ask if I was sure I wasn't his assistant or something. I would tell them I was positive, and that I'd never met Dan and didn't work for his company. The annoyed callers would then argue that Dan had told them to call this number and ask if I could at least take a message. I would refuse, explaining that I couldn't take a message for someone I didn't know and would never see. I considered calling Dan's company directly to complain, but I hate confrontation. I just hoped it would eventually stop. It didn't. The breaking point came last month. I was waiting for an important call about a job interview, and my phone rang. I answered, introducing myself by name, thinking it might be my potential employer. The caller immediately asked to speak with Dan about the Cooper project, explaining that Dan was late delivering materials and that their boss was breathing down their neck. Something in me snapped. 5 years of this nonsense. 5 years of being Dan's personal call screener. I decided right then that I'd had enough. I told the caller that they hadn't heard the news, explaining that Dan had relocated to Arizona rather suddenly. The caller was shocked, saying they had just received an email from Dan yesterday. I continued with my story, telling them it was interesting because from what I understood, there were some legal issues involving embezzlement, and the whole thing was very hush-hush. The caller went silent for a moment before asking if I was serious about the embezzlement. I doubled down, saying that's what I've been told by other callers, and that apparently the whole operation was under investigation now. I even added that I was surprised they hadn't been contacted yet. The caller sounded panicked, telling me they had just signed a contract with Dan's company the previous week. I warned them that they might want to look into that because from what I was hearing, things were pretty chaotic over there right now. After I hung up, I felt a little guilty, but then my phone rang again and again. 3 more calls for Dan that day alone. So I stuck with my story. To everyone who called asking for Dan, I told the same tale about Arizona and embezzlement and investigations. About 2 weeks into my little misinformation campaign, something interesting happened. My phone rang and I answered with my usual greeting. The caller asked if they had reached my number, and I confirmed that they had. They clarified that they were not Dan, but rather Dan's supervisor. They told me that Dan had said someone at this number had been spreading rumors about him and their company, and asked if I knew anything about that. I didn't hold back. I told them that I knew plenty, that Dan had been giving out my personal phone number to clients and contacts for years, that I had received hundreds of calls meant for him, and that despite how frustrating this had been, I had been patient until recently. The supervisor went quiet for a moment before saying they weren't aware of that situation. I pressed on, telling them that now they knew, and suggested that instead of calling to scold me, they should talk to Dan about his behavior. I also suggested they could provide their clients with an actual working number for their company instead of mine. The supervisor agreed that Dan's behavior was unacceptable and told me that it will be addressed immediately. They then asked if I would stop telling people about the Arizona and embezzlement situation. I agreed to their request, but with a condition: as soon as I stopped getting calls for Dan, the rumors would stop too. I told them that seemed fair. The supervisor promised to handle it, and within days the calls dropped off dramatically. I still get one occasionally, but now I simply explain to the caller that Dan gave them my personal number instead of his work contact. I suggest they call a company directly and let them know Dan is still doing this, even after being told not to. It's amazing how quickly problems can be solved when someone's reputation is on the line. So Dan, if you're somehow reading this, next time just give people your actual number. Or I might have to come up with a story more creative than Arizona. I've been managing Sparkle and Shine Car Wash for about 8 years now. Started as a regular attendant when I was 19, worked my way up through hard work and dedication. The owner, an older guy who wanted to spend more time fishing than washing cars, handed me the reins when I turned 25. Our car wash isn't one of those fancy, automated places. We have a drive-through tunnel with all the equipment, but we also offer hand detailing and finishing touches. My team is like family. Mostly young folks working part-time through college, but they're reliable and hard-working. Last Tuesday started like any normal day. The morning rush had died down and we were in that mid-afternoon lull when she pulled up in her shiny white luxury SUV. I was in the office handling some invoices when I heard the commotion. One of my youngest staff members, a shy college freshman who'd only been with us for 2 weeks, was trying to explain our pricing tiers to this woman. From my office window, I could see her gesturing wildly and pointing at our price board. When I stepped outside, I caught the tail end of her tirade. She was rudely calling my employee incompetent because he couldn't understand her request for a premium wash without the undercarriage spray. The poor kid was nearly in tears, fumbling with the tablet we use for processing orders. I approached and asked if there was a problem I could help with. She seemed relieved to see me, sarcastically commenting that finally someone with a brain had arrived. She complained that my employee couldn't understand that she didn't want to pay for services she didn't need, calling the undercarriage spray a waste of money. I told her that our premium package comes as a complete service and we can't remove individual components to adjust the price. She became indignant, insisting that as the customer, she was always right. Then she turned to my employee and unleashed a string of profanities, insulting him by saying this was why he worked at a car wash instead of a real job and couldn't even push the right buttons on a tablet. That's when I decided enough was enough. I told her she needed to speak respectfully to my staff or take her business elsewhere. She threatened me, claiming her husband played golf with the owner and that I'd lose my job by sunset. I almost laughed. The owner hasn't played golf a day in his life and spends most of his time on a fishing boat these days. I told her that I was the manager who made the decisions and asked if she wanted the premium wash as it comes or preferred another package. She grudgingly agreed to the premium wash, demanding we hurry because she had important places to be. She slapped her credit card down on the counter so hard, I thought it might crack. After paying, she walked back to her vehicle and drove to the entrance of the wash tunnel. As she pulled in, I had an idea. Not my proudest moment, but when someone treats my staff like that, my protective instincts kick in. Our car wash system is controlled from a main panel in our office. I can start, pause, or adjust the cycle from there. Usually we only pause for mechanical issues, but today was going to be different. I let her car get about halfway through, right at the point where it was covered in thick, pink soap foam. Then I hit the pause button. Through the tunnel windows, I could see her confusion turn to anger. She honked her horn several times. After about 5 minutes, she called our front desk. She angrily asked why the car wash had stopped and complained that she was stuck inside. I told her we were experiencing a technical issue that would be resolved shortly. She responded that this was unacceptable and ordered me to get her out immediately. I explained that the system was automated, and when there's a pause, we have to wait for it to reset itself due to safety protocols. She hung up. 10 minutes passed. She called again, more frantic this time, explaining that she had an important appointment and accusing us of keeping her trapped. I apologized for the inconvenience and told her our technician was looking at the problem. Another 15 minutes went by. By now, the soap had started to dry a bit on her vehicle, creating a crusty layer. She finally did what I expected. She opened her door and tried to get out. That's when I hit the resume button. The sprayers immediately came back on, soaking her fancy outfit completely. She screamed and tried to get back in her car but slipped on the soapy floor and landed right on her backside. By the time she managed to get back in her vehicle, she was drenched and covered in soap. I let the cycle finish normally after that. When she finally emerged from the tunnel, she was livid. Hair plastered to her head, makeup running down her face, clothes soaking wet. She threatened to call the police, claiming this was assault and imprisonment, and vowed to sue me into oblivion. She did call the police. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. I explained that we had experienced a technical malfunction with our system, which happens occasionally. I showed them our maintenance log where I'd conveniently noted a system pause issue earlier that morning. The officers didn't seem concerned, especially when my soaked customer started screaming obscenities at them too. One officer told her that this appeared to be an unfortunate mechanical issue and no laws had been broken. She insisted that we had trapped her on purpose to humiliate her, but when the officer asked for evidence, she had none. The officers helped her get her car out of our lot, and as she drove away, she was still screaming out her window about lawsuits and revenge. She never came back, and we never heard from any lawyers. My young employee, though, got a hefty bonus in his next paycheck and a promise from me that no customer would ever speak to him that way again. I've been a pharmacist for 15 years. I like helping people understand their medications. 3 years ago, I moved to a small town in Arizona to be closer to my aging parents. Job options for pharmacists were limited there, so I was glad to find a position at the local Safeway. I was walking into a nightmare situation with my new pharmacy manager. From day one, I could tell something was off. She watched my every move, hovering behind me as I counted pills or typed prescriptions. Nothing I did was good enough. When I spent more than 30 seconds talking to a customer about their medication, she would interrupt or pull me aside later to lecture me about efficiency. She would remind me that we weren't there to chat with customers, but to fill prescriptions quickly. I disagreed. Patient education is important in pharmacy practice, but I kept my mouth shut because I couldn't afford to lose this job. Her control issues showed in strange ways. Every night at closing, we had to cover all computer keyboards with plastic covers, perfectly aligned with no wrinkles. Pill counting trays had to be arranged in perfect rows. Files had to be color-coded and alphabetized to her specifications, which changed weekly. When the regional manager came to town, my boss would transform into a different person, all smiles and pleasantries. They'd leave for lunch together for hours while the rest of us handled the workload. When they returned, she'd be in a worse mood, looking for anything to criticize. Once, I asked if I should help Mrs. Rodriguez understand how to use her new insulin pen. My boss told me she had already explained it yesterday and said I was wasting time. When I tried to explain that Mrs. Rodriguez had returned saying she didn't understand how to use it, my boss shut me down and ordered me to go count amoxicillin prescriptions instead. This went on for months. I started dreading going to work, but pharmacy positions were scarce and moving wasn't an option, with my parents needing me nearby. So I kept my head down and followed her rules. Then came the day that changed everything. I arrived for my shift wearing my usual work outfit, black pants, black shoes, and my white pharmacist coat. When I walked in, she looked me up and down. She told me my pants weren't black enough. When I asked her to clarify, she said my pants were charcoal, not black, and the dress code stated black pants. I was stunned. These were the same pants I'd worn dozens of times before. I pointed out that these were the same pants I always wore. She said she was just noticing now they weren't black enough, and she was writing me up for a dress code violation. She pulled out the form documenting my violation in detail. I signed it without arguing because I knew it wouldn't help. But inside something snapped. That evening after my shift, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the mall with a plan forming in my mind. My first stop was the workwear store where I bought 2 pairs of Dickies work pants in jet black, about 3 sizes too big. Then I headed to Hot Topic, a store I'd never entered before in my life. I purchased a heavy chain belt, spiked wristbands, and several pieces of gothic jewelry featuring skulls and bats. My final stop was the shoe store for a pair of genuine Doc Martens boots. I was transforming into a goth girl at 45 years old. That night, my neighbor's 16-year-old daughter helped me with makeup. She seemed delighted by my rebellion. My neighbor's daughter was amazed that I was doing this to mess with my boss. I explained that since my boss had said my pants weren't black enough, I wanted to see what she thought of this new look. The next morning I arrived at work in my oversized black Dickies, chain belt clinking with each step, Doc Martens laced up to my ankles, and gothic jewelry adorning my wrists and neck. My eyes were heavily lined with black, and I'd even painted my nails black. The white pharmacist coat was the only thing unchanged. My boss's mouth fell open, and for once, she had nothing to say. Several customers did double takes, but most seemed amused. A few even complimented my new style. One customer told me they loved my new look and that my boots were amazing. I thanked them and mentioned I was just making sure I was following the dress code perfectly. My boss spent the entire shift trying to find something in the employee handbook that would allow her to write me up again. But there was nothing there. The dress code simply specified black pants or skirt, black shoes, and white pharmacist coat. Nothing mentioned jewelry, makeup, or how fitted your clothes should be. The following week, the regional manager came for his monthly visit. My boss walked him into her office, probably hoping he would back her up about my appearance. They went to lunch for over 2 hours, leaving me to handle the busy pharmacy alone. When they returned, the regional manager just gave me a curious look, but said nothing about my appearance. My boss looked defeated. The ultimate victory came a few days later when a secret shopper visited our pharmacy. He approached me with questions about digestive health products, specifically how to take Metamucil powder without it turning into a clumpy mess. I explained to him that the trick was to stir it really quickly into cold water and drink it immediately. I added that I like to tell people to stir it like they're running from zombies, fast and desperate. The man laughed and thanked me for the helpful advice and humor. 2 weeks later, during a staff meeting, the regional manager showed up with an announcement. The regional manager announced that we had a secret shopper visit recently, and he was pleased to present me with the company's Smile Award for exceptional customer service. He handed me a certificate for a free donut and coffee from the Safeway bakery. My boss looked like she'd swallowed something sour. The regional manager then added that they would be implementing some customer service refresher training. He said our pharmacy manager would be attending the company's Smile School program next month to work on creating a more welcoming environment for our customers. My boss turned red. She knew exactly why she was being sent to Smile School. Her poor attitude with customers had finally caught up with her. I continued my gothic pharmacist look for months. Eventually, I toned it down a bit, but kept the Doc Martens and some of the jewelry. They've become part of my personal style. A reminder that standing up for yourself can come in unexpected packages. After Smile School, my boss's micromanagement decreased significantly. She still wasn't pleasant, but she seemed afraid to criticize me too openly. And I found my voice again, speaking up when I disagreed with her policies, especially when it came to patient care. Customer service scores for our pharmacy went up, and I started enjoying my work again. I work at a retail store as a floor associate, which means I spend 8 hours a day helping customers find what they need, stocking shelves, and keeping the place running. My shifts are usually pretty long, so bathroom breaks are sacred moments of peace in my otherwise hectic day. Just 5 minutes to myself where I don't have to smile or answer questions about where to find the peanut butter or explain why we're out of toilet paper. So there I was, in the bathroom at my workplace, The massive superstore that everyone knows, let's just call it Wally World, sitting in a stall when the bathroom door swung open. That's when it started. This guy walks in bellowing into his phone, not just talking, shouting, and to make matters worse, he had his phone on speaker, with the volume cranked up so I could hear every word from both sides of the conversation. In my head, I wondered if he was serious, choosing the bathroom of all places for his loud phone call. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured he'd wrap up his call quickly once he realized someone else was in there. I could hear the loud guy yelling about how something wouldn't work for him and that he needed it by Tuesday. The person on the other end of the phone asked if he had filled out some paperwork they had sent. The loud guy dismissed this, saying he wasn't going to waste his time filling out 3 pages just to get what he felt entitled to. And on, and on, and on. The minutes ticked by, and this one-man noise factory showed no signs of ending his call. 5 minutes passed. I finished my business, but I was getting irritated. Who goes into a public bathroom and holds the entire space hostage with their personal conversation? When I finally left the stall, the guy was still yelling into his phone, now pacing near the sinks. He didn't even notice me, just continued his loud conversation about how everyone at his job was incompetent and how his boss was trying to sabotage him. That's when I decided, fine. You want to be loud and obnoxious in public? Game on. I walked to the sink and washed my hands thoroughly. I took my time letting the soap foam up between my fingers. All the while, this guy is standing there still shouting about his workplace drama. Then came my moment. I stepped over to the hand dryer. Now, the hand dryers at this particular Wally World are not your average hand dryers. They're industrial-strength air cannons that sound like jet engines taking off. And this specific one, the one closest to where phone guy was standing, had a special quality. If you position your hands just right under the nozzle, it creates this ear-splitting, high-pitched whine that bounces off every surface in the bathroom. I pressed the button. The noise was immediate and deafening. I saw phone guy flinch and turn to glare at me, but I just smiled and continued drying my hands. I could hear the loud guy struggling with his call now. He was yelling hello and asking if the person could hear him. He kept saying to hang on because of the noise, clearly frustrated that our conversation was being disrupted. I made sure to position my hands at exactly the right angle to create that special, banshee-like screech. The sound bounced off the tile walls, creating a noise that made normal conversation impossible. Eventually, the phone guy told whoever was on the line that he would call them back, his voice barely audible over the dryer's roar. But I wasn't done. I kept that dryer going, moving my hands around slowly, making sure every single drop of water was completely gone. I even turned them over, examining my nails, checking between my fingers, being incredibly thorough. The guy shot me another dirty look, then hurried out of the bathroom, his phone still pressed to his ear, trying to explain the noise to whoever was on the other end. I must have spent a full 2 minutes at that hand dryer. I saw him later that day shopping in the electronics section. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away and walked in the opposite direction. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.